yeah.
Did you see they're coming out with a new season of Curb Your Enthusiasm?
I think they came out with one like
really?
Last year or 2 years ago. I haven't watched anything since it went off the air the first time.
Yeah.
But that was a great show.
Great show. But yeah, they're coming out with a new one. It's just the ad is great. It's just like, I forget what it says, but it's just like an outline. And you just know exactly who it is. Larry David. It's like his curly Jewish hair and his glasses. You're just like, yep, I'm ready. Such a good show. Did you got the socks are a problem today? I feel like we're really going back here. This is a good opportunity based on the fact that it's January 2nd here.
That's my New Year's resolution. Black socks. Black socks, gray shoes.
Black socks and gray shoes can be okay if you're not wearing blue jeans.
I need like gray socks or like patterned socks.
This is the rule with socks. The shade or a shade darker of your pants. So you need blue or dark blue. That's the rule. Don't question. Just do what people. This is what I've learned in life, man. You know, like how you get older and then you learn that your mom tells you things and she's basically always right. You know, or like women tell you what looks good when you dress up. You just learn to listen to certain people in life. And yep, you just need to match the shade of your pants or go one shade darker. But fortunately, your feet aren't on camera right now, so not a problem.
That'd be weird.
I think they used to be. I don't know. I was going to make a weird joke about developers with foot fetishes, but we're just going to move on.
Yeah. Happy New Year, man.
Happy New Year, dude. I haven't seen you that much. We still haven't completely caught up. It's been like, I feel like these times you just go out and everyone's just like, all right, let's just pick it back up on January 7th. I don't care when you're actually taking a break, but no one's going to be around until then.
Yeah.
Well, I like that Ted, they would shut down the office for 2 weeks. I feel like that was the best because otherwise you got half the people coming in different times. Just shut it down.
Yeah.
Be honest about it. No one's going to be doing anything until week 2 of January.
Exactly.
So
people that work over Christmas that no one's working.
Yeah. But
there's one person that's listening to this and like, God damn it, I'm working.
Yeah, man, it was good. I was in Minnesota. It wasn't as cold as it's been the last few years, but hanging out with the nieces and nephews, they're really growing up. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. Me and my sister were looking at like pictures of my oldest niece when she was like a baby and stuff, and like now she's like, oh, she's a teenager. She's 13. She has dyed hair. She's wearing ripped jeans. Oof. She's getting arguments with her parents about crop top sweaters. Like, ooh, this is a new territory. Yeah. Tell me how this goes. Also, I think it's just going to get worse and worse. I think with boys, it's easier the first 10 years, harder the first 10 years, and easier the second 10. Because, you know, when they're kids, like they're babies, and they're like peeing everywhere. They're just ridiculous, right? And with girls, like they're just sweet little girls until they're 10 years old, right? And then they hit those teenage years. And then you have to deal with teenage girls, whereas guys maybe mellow out a little bit. But I don't know. That's what they say. Nothing I have to worry about yet, so. It was fun, though. I started hacking on EmberMap on the plane. Just wanted something kind of easy to do. You know, not a big project or anything. I've been wanting to refactor some of our Tailwind code. Mm-hmm. And because when we add features and stuff, it's kind of a pain just because it's like, dude, so what happened with EmberMap was we built it using tachyons. And I think we even started it before we used tachyons because we have Sass files in there.
I think we started with like BEM.
Exactly. So there's BEM component CSS in there where you have the Sass co-located with the components, which is good in the sense that like we're not talking about a big global style sheet here that's hard to know how it affects it. So like, man, to me, I think that's like one of the most important principles is just co-location. Because when you want to delete a component or refactor it, you got it all right there, you know?
Yep.
And there's definitely some tension sometimes where you're like, I just want global H1s to do this, but I think components are just so much better for that. You know, having worked in React a little bit, that is one thing I really like about it is just the ability to create little H1s or titles or texts and even doing it locally to a component or a route very easily and just having that nice small step from a local thing to something that's shareable. So yeah, it's just right now it's a mess of component and BEM like Sass usage, and then we went to tachyons, and so we had a bunch of tachyons. And at this point, I think we did start abstracting like UI components, so like UI container, and like UI grid and like UI title and stuff like that. And we made this little mix-in where you can, change the variant of a component and change which atomic classes are applied to it based on like the style argument. And so it was like UI title style large, and that would be like, not only would it change the text, it would change it appropriately on like the different responsive breakpoints, and it would change the line height together and stuff like that. And so that was kind of a neat abstraction layer. And when we changed from tachyons to Tailwind, we were able to use Tailwind, plugging in the values from tachyons and the class names, and refactor those UI components to use the Tailwind values instead, the class name conventions, but with the tachyons values, and then not have to change a lot of the code. So that was pretty cool. But what's happened is that since we've become more comfortable using Tailwind, and importantly because Tailwind 1.0 did a really good job of giving you enough like padding and spacing utilities. Like the old Tailwind didn't have like all this stuff, so it was more likely that you wanted to customize it. But with 1.0, there's like a ton of stuff, and it's like really well thought through that you would need these things, and you should be able to make most of your app with it. And so there's this whole like extends idea, and you should be relying on the defaults like 95% of the time. And that kind of changes how you build the front end and how much of these UI components you really need versus just using the built-in utilities, right? Mm-hmm. There's less of a clear cutoff between like the low-level utilities and your UI components, because a lot of the Tailwind stuff has like your design system in it already.
So you're saying that the Tailwind has better defaults, and therefore it's with tachyons, maybe you should never be using like a margin of 4.
Exactly.
Because it's just a weird,
exactly.
It doesn't scale right.
When we were using tachyons, I felt the need to encode that stuff earlier on into like a constrained design system. And even with early Tailwind, I was still thinking that. Whereas now with new Tailwind, like we've made the Mirage site, I've made my personal site, and in both times I felt like I can get very far thinking in Tailwind and only pull into like making UI components that are like presenters once I need them, and it's much further later than when we felt like we needed to achieve consistency and all that good stuff. So it's like you're getting better using Tailwind, but it's also just, again, at the spacing scale, the font size scale, the colors, they've been more well thought out. So you feel like you have to escape those defaults or extend them less often.
Okay.
So you can get much further. Because to me, ideally, like if you can make your site with default Tailwind, that's something that's worth striving for, because you're not maintaining anything. And this is something that people, I think, is lost on people who haven't been using Tailwind or functional CSS, is that there's a lot of confusing debates and discussions about the API and about tools that like output atomic CSS and about all these kinds of obfuscating the class names. Like that's not what it's all about. Like it's all about the fact that like you're not writing the CSS, you're not maintaining these complex things. Like maintainable CSS is not even something that you discuss when you use this, because the CSS is not yours to maintain. It's Tailwind's to maintain.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a hard point to communicate without using it.
Yeah. And Tailwind also gives you, it's low level enough that also gives you the composability.
Yeah.
Where like I can make the argument like, well, if I use Bootstrap, I don't have to maintain the CSS. But
is that true?
Well,
no, you always
because
end up writing CSS.
Important.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the escape hatches are an important point.
Yeah.
That is low level enough that you're not going to get stuck in a bad abstraction, because it's basically just CSS rules. It's just a constrained subset of them.
Yeah.
And with ways to extend them when you need to.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So what have you been doing?
So yeah, just to kind of finish that, it's like, yeah, people on this debate about CSS versus libraries like Tailwind, it's just, whether you're writing like co-located styles like we were at the beginning of EmberMap, or you're using a framework like Tachyons or Tailwind, having them co-located is just so important. And I just feel like it's a way easier approach than trying to like learn how to write maintainable global CSS. And again, I just think you have to try it to become a believer, because I was all into those different CSS approaches and stuff before, but now it's just like, I can't imagine. Like I'm looking at this old code in our code base and just refactoring it feels so good to like pull it into default Tailwind things, because I know once I'm using all default Tailwind and then a few extensions, I'm going to be able to upgrade to 1.0 and just delete all that config stuff. And it's just like, I just can't imagine not using it on a project. It's crazy.
Oh yeah.
We've just learned so much too.
I mean, just the speed.
Yeah.
Like, even from like just dismissing all the theoretical stuff.
Yeah.
Just the speed.
Yeah.
It's so much faster.
I was also learning a lot during like the refactoring and stuff about how much that it's taught us about design. And this might also be related to like the kinds of pages we've been making in the last year or two, and how we've learned about better ways to structure things, and even like what kinds of UI presenter components the community makes. And people like React and Storybook do a lot of this. They think a lot. They've been talking a lot about the appropriate ways to abstract this. So like there's just so many things we would do differently now. So we just have so many weird things where we were really confused about margin. Like we've talked about this before, really confused about margin and padding and like containers and a grid. And we have lots of ways to do all that stuff. And when you mix those concerns, it is so confusing.
And it's very easy to mix those three
Very
things.
easy, very easy. Whereas I just went through this on my personal site, and I'm still learning this lesson, but I eventually was like, oh, wait a second. Like, so you have this issue with a container where you want to say like max width of like 768. And on like a big screen, on a 27-inch screen, you want it to be 768, right? That's what you want the content to be. And then when you make it smaller and it goes below that, you want to have some padding on the side. So like when you're on a phone, right? So what do? Because if you put the padding on the max width 768 or whatever, max width extra large or whatever, now on the big screen, it's not 768, it's 768 like that. And that's like, maybe that's like fine, but it's also just confusing when you're thinking about laying things out in a grid on a big screen. And you're like, I'm actually not working with, 1024. I'm working with like that -5 padding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it occurred to me like these are actually different concerns. And if you put the padding on the outside, it just works. Because on lower levels, the padding takes effect. But once you get to a big screen, you have width of 768 and then you have the padding outside. It's not doing anything because you're already bigger. So boom, just like that, you have container, which is one thing, and surprisingly like doesn't have padding. And then you have padding on the outside.
Do you wrap that all up into a single container?
I wasn't on my site, and it was making it a lot easier. And I was like, oh, if I just need, it's almost like the padding is like a different component and the container is like something else. I still need to go through and think about this, but like basically just learning this lesson of like, okay, let me start by adding an extra wrapper, and that will help me share and understand the abstractions. Whereas if you look at EmberMap's code base, there's all these things that are mixed in together. We have like a UI container, and it yields like a container, and you can do like a container.escape classes, which would like get it out of the container.
Yep.
Which is a cool idea, but like it just makes it harder to understand. And it would be better to just stack and like have a container that you can just, if you had a section that was like narrow and then wide, then narrow, just do that.
100%.
You know what I'm saying?
Also too, every project I work on that hits this, it doesn't start out with narrow, wide, narrow. It starts out with narrow, and then someone comes in and brings a new design.
Exactly.
That's a wide design where like the things that you can imagine, like a background color that extends the container that goes the full width of the screen. And so you as a developer looking at, oh, there's a container component. What API can I add to this to have this full extending container?
Right.
Yeah. And then you end up with these weird things.
Right.
Like yielding out a container,
right.
doing container.wide.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were looking at that, it would be easier to just say, have a separate container, and just be able to, oh, now we need to be outside of it. Okay, let's like just close the container, do the thing, and then open a new one. It's no problem.
This is an argument going back to like why Tailwind defaults or that the things that Tailwind makes you think about are good, because it's that low level escape hatch stuff where you're not
getting into bad abstraction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, 100%, man.
Also too, like just as you're talking about this, one thing I've noticed over the last probably 2 years is that it's really nice when we start these components and we come up with the constraints. Like I have 3 different buttons. I have a danger button, a disabled button, and like an action button and a cancel button, 4 buttons. The thing I've noticed is that as apps get worked on, and this is especially true with like apps with like, they don't have a full-time designer.
Right.
There's like 4 front-end developers.
Right.
It's so easy to just come in and add a 5th button.
Right.
And add a 6th button. And like there's some we'll have like 8 buttons in some places.
Right.
And so that's like, we actually like, we came up with this abstraction, but then we didn't, the idea was to have constraints, but if there's 8 buttons, like, do we really have constraints?
Right.
And so that's where like this stuff gets really, really tricky.
Totally. Yeah. I just think there's a certain point where it makes sense to really enforce them. But like early on in a project, or when a project that you're not working on that much, it's just so much easier to rely on like the lower level stuff.
Yeah. It's hard to enforce. It's hard to enforce them if you don't have like full-time designer.
Yeah.
Or like someone that's thinking about that.
I think that's more important, is someone who's thinking about it, because having worked on this, like, and just again building a couple sites in the last year with like brand new slate, I think there is a set of like UI components that could be shared more. So like as another concrete example, like Grid, for example. So when we were doing Grid at the beginning, I forget how Tachyons does it, but we basically translated it over to Tailwind, and it was like really confusing. And we max width something in the column. Anyways, like Grid is a grid should be, again, thinking about the boundaries of a component. So again, like a grid should fill its container. If you have like a grid that's like 2 column on small screens and then 3 columns on big screens, but it should go to the edges. It shouldn't have padding on the outside. It shouldn't do any of that stuff. And the width of each column should just be percentage based, not pixel based. Mm-hmm. And the parent should be in charge of constraining it. And so the idea that like those sizes are derived from the context and the parent and how the parent's choosing to lay it out, as opposed to like a podcast card knowing what its width is. So like these are things that we just didn't understand very well when we were making this. Like the podcast card, and you get it because you're making a podcast card and you're like, this thing has like a max width of 400. It's like that's what it is, but it's just very weird when you have that on the thing and you go to lay it out. It's like it's weird, right? So it's like it's very interesting.
It is. It's also like it's kind of like the co-location stuff. Is I'm working on the podcast card. I'm in the podcast card component. I'm going to start styling it.
Yeah.
I'm going to put like the width there just because that's where I'm working.
Yeah, but now I wouldn't. I mean, right.
Right. You know to go out.
Exactly.
Like the margin thing.
Exactly.
I think margin is the first time we learned this.
You make a huge thing, dude. I can't wait. So my goal once I change all these things is to just do a control find for marginless, which is like a variant that we added to our UI components to remove the margin, which probably should have been a clear sign to us that this was not part of it.
Yeah.
But
wait, can you explain the margin thing?
Yeah. So let's say we have like a UIP, like a text component that we use for all of our text because we want the text to be measured and, responsively like sized, consistent with other text on the site. And so also you just wanted to be able to do something like when I render a P and then a P and then a P, like I want a margin bottom on each one of like 1.5 or whatever rems or something like that. And so that's like the default thing. That's the happy path. So it makes sense to have that in it. But then like there's just so many things, right?
You get to that last paragraph and you're like, I don't want a margin here.
You have a heading we do margin top now everywhere. That's the other thing is like, that's such a good rule. It's like margin top, everything, margin bottom, nothing. It's like a great rule. Sometimes you like padding bottom on the top and container or whatever, but margin top everywhere just simplifies things so much. So the padding bottom is on the text. And then, of course, situations come up where you don't want that. There's like a heading or an image afterwards. You want to add more or less of it. It's just so much easier not to have it at all. Again, I watched that talk by Mark Dalgash, and they go to an extreme length where in CSS, you could actually argue like CSS and the browser's behavior here is like broken because of the fact that when you render, a paragraph of text with a line height of 1.5, you're going to be going above the top of the H or whatever. And when it's really, you would ideally want that to only affect the lines of text if
between
there's multiple.
The lines,
exactly.
Between the lines,
exactly. Right. But if you could have it to where the top was really the top of the text, then that would help you lay out things more consistently. Because sometimes you need to you change the line height and it's actually affecting your layout. If you change the line height, it's going to move the top down, and you wouldn't ideally want that. You would ideally want, and I don't think that's how like iOS works and stuff like that. So anyways, he does this crazy thing to remove that, but just the point that you want these things to have boundaries, and the boundaries have to be inside the component. And so anything like margin and spacing. So anyways, we started adding these marginless variants. So I could render a UI title marginless, and a text marginless, and it's just like so bad. You just want a wrapper that has some margin. Layout is a separate concern from font size and things like that. So it's really it's the layout stuff that felt the most missing or the hardest to understand. It's the least intuitive.
Mm-hmm. Of course it's not intuitive because you're making a button component. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be in that button component.
Right.
Writing CSS,
thinking about
adding
how
styles.
It should be laid out.
Right. You're not going to be thinking like, oh, this should actually be, I'm making a button component, but this should actually be outside of the button.
Right.
Even though the reason it exists is to make the button look right.
Right.
That's really hard.
Yep.
That's really hard to realize.
And it's also like, how should the button fill up? Like, should it be wide and all this stuff? And a lot of that depends on it's a layout concern. It's not a button concern.
Yeah.
So you want to make the components like as there's like a good word here where it's like it works in any context, and it's really it doesn't limit the parent. It doesn't limit the person deciding how to lay you out. So it fills the container, and that way if you needed a full button, the parent could do it without changing the child. It's like open close. It's like open to extension, closed. What is it? Open to extension, the OOP principle. Closed to open closed principle.
Sure.
That's part of solid, right?
Yeah.
It's open to extension, closed for modification, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that
makes sense. That makes sense.
So that's the idea is like, how can you design this component in a way that is open to extension without you having to go and add marginless? That was a clear violation of the of open close principle. So I really believe that. So like same with the grid filling up its space and all this stuff so that you can use it, and that's like a test that you can see whether it passes. Can I use this UI component in this new layout and new design without having to change it? Or is there some fundamental assumption I made about it? Oh, the button's going to be a max width 100 pixels or something like that.
There's something I keep coming back to this. There's something I still don't like about this, in that if I thought about the variance of a button, I would think like, oh, there's a wide variant. And I think when you look at the way we like style our components with variants, there are buttons and apps we work on that have like wide true
for
or
sure.
Style wide. But you're convincing me like just everything you just said is like, no, that's wrong.
Well,
I'm totally convinced,
yeah,
but it's
hard because this is another thing I was thinking about while I was doing this, which is like, is it possible to have a tool that's flexible enough to let you build what you need to build and constrain you from rendering something that is out of line with the design system? So if you have a tool like Tailwind that's powerful enough to build basically anything, is there ways that you can use Tailwind to produce bad designs? Of course there are. So that's always like the challenge. How much can you constrain without impeding people's ability to make the designs they need to make? So I think right now where I'm at, it's like just based on our experiences, right? It's like so easy to prematurely abstract, and it's so dangerous too. And so it's better to give people more powerful low-level tools and teach them how to use it. And it's nice to think like, of course, abstraction is like super important, but it's also hard.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I completely agree with everything you just said.
yeah, but it's tough because you really do have to learn a little bit. So that's what I was thinking. So like, again, going back to like the grid, we didn't know how to make a grid. I forget how you do a grid in tachyons.
I think since switching to functional, we dropped the concept of grid, and we do a flex container.
That's basically what it is.
Yeah,
but
I think in like Bootstrap, there's like
grid.
You actually have like grid,
Yeah,
class
yeah.
row, class column.
Sure, but then like if you do the flex thing, how do you do gutters was an issue for us.
Yeah.
And so we have this part of the podcast page where it's like they have like some extra spacing, and then you do like justify between. It's not really right. What you want is a grid with gutters. And in Tailwind, the way you do that is with negative margin on the parent and then padding X on the children, and it works out beautifully. And so again, just knowing that, we're actually doing a Tailwind training at EmberConf, and these are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about. Because I feel like, again, going back to this idea of learning how to use a tool and working with something more powerful instead of working with something more constrained and getting stuck is a better approach. And it's just a few of these things that if I would have known 2 or 3 years ago when we first wrote EmberMap, it would have been a lot better. So yeah, doing the grid right. And again, just like having the extra layers and not saying, how can we make one container component that does all these things? No, a container is about constraining width. Padding is about making it work right. Grid is about columns with gutters. But again, the gutters are in the middle and the grid doesn't know about its width at all. Another one I want to work on is like a grid or like a layout that's like, once the cards are fixed width, and then once they get big enough, you can wrap them. But it does it in like a nice way. So there's just a few of those things where it's like, like if you look at our UI container, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It has like, you have to escape padding sometimes, you have to like escape margin sometimes. It doesn't make any sense. Like, and the stuff that I've been doing more recently makes a lot more sense. This is one more thing I want to make about all this is, one more point is that, the other benefit of using Tailwind default values and only extending them when absolutely necessary is that you learn some of these lessons. So if you look at our customized Tailwind config, a lot of it, we were just used to customizing everything because when we first did tachyons and then did Tailwind, it's like you take ownership of all values in the whole scale. And so then it's just fine. You just add some new ones because you already have, a width file with like the 12 default values. So just add a 13th or 14th, no problem. The problem is if you look at the defaults in particular for width. So if you look at width, there's like, it doesn't go up that much. Like the highest width is like 64 or 128, which is like times 4 is like 256 pixels or something like that. And so there's times where you want like a width of 400 or 500 or 600. And you're like, wait a second, like the width doesn't have a thing here. But if you look at the max width defaults from Tailwind, there are things like, so width is like width 1, width 2, width 3, width 5, width 6 numbers. Mm-hmm. It's cardinal values. So like width 8 is twice width 4 because 8 is twice 4. Whereas the max width scale is an ordinal scale. It's small, medium, large, right? You can't tell me how much bigger large is than medium because there's no cardinal difference there.
Is this reflected in the name? It's like XL, 2XL? Or?
Yeah, it is, but it's an ordinal scale. It's like first, second, third, fourth. You can't just tell me how much farther ahead is first than third. Right. Whereas width 8 and width 16 is like, it's double, right? That wouldn't make sense for it not to be double. Right. So Tailwind uses cardinal values in the scale where you want to be able to infer the difference with things like padding and margin, the spacing scale. But when they use like t-shirt sizes, like these ordinal values, it's different, right? And so how you use it should be reflected in that too. So if you want something that's like 4 or 5 or 600, you're probably doing like a layout concern, and you probably want the children to fill the container and the parent to have a constraint on their max width. So we have all these things where it's like we added 440 pixels to our width scale, and what really we wanted to do was like have a max width of like 768 on the parent and a 2-column grid, and have, again, those sizes derived from it. So I thought that was a really interesting point, is that by embracing the constraints and the scales and the values in original Tailwind, you learn how to use it better.
You learn the thinking behind it.
Totally.
I mean, who would have thought that the people making a CSS framework have thought about this stuff.
Right, exactly. And same with like the colors and tracking and letter spacing and line height. Like there's a reason some of the default scales in Tailwind have 4 or 5 values and others have 20 or 25. And it's supposed to affect how you use the different utility classes. So yeah, I was feeling like pretty good about how much we've learned, and it was definitely cleaning things up.
Nice.
Pretty cool. Tailwind's awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
I really do think there could be something really cool with some like UI components that, again, like if you watch that talk from Mark Dalgesh, like specifically the layout components, I think that's actually one of the hardest things. That's actually one of the things that first sold me on functional CSS, because BEM was fine as far as styling components goes. It was always the stuff in between components that was hard to style with BEM, because you don't have explicit named layout components. So you have like your profile and like profile underscore avatar, profile underscore, follower count, whatever. And then you have like, your feed or whatever. But then once you start laying out those components in between, okay, I'm just like home, I guess, and you're just making up stuff. And you really just want separate components that are dedicated to layout.
Is there a good test? I would like a good I'm doing something, and there's just like a light bulb that goes off in my head that's like, oh, this is a layout concern, and therefore it shouldn't be inside of the component I'm making.
Yeah. Well, width, max width, margin, sometimes padding. I think width is the big one because that's what you're going to be using.
So is there like a test? Like are you
extending width a bunch? Are you adding random values to width and max width? That's one test.
Is there like a test where I can give you a button and you render it inside of some container and you can make sure it fills the container?
I mean, that's a good
margin.
Yep. That's a really good one. Like just from earlier when you were saying like the button thing, and you would think like it would have a max width, but maybe it shouldn't. Like, dude, inputs, like on our email course page, there's like an input and sometimes it stretches and then it has a max width on it. And yeah, that shouldn't be part of the input.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I don't think.
No, it shouldn't, because we're getting more and more towards we started with margin.
Yeah, exactly.
And now we're here with width.
Exactly.
I think it's really hard. And also just part of my experience is just working on apps with a lot of developers where there's no one thinking about design.
Right.
And that, it's just really easy to come in and add variants and that sort of stuff. So it would be nice if there was some rule
to know if you're going off the rails.
So like a good example of this is when Tailwind added the colors and the scale goes up by 100 and it's easy to add colors in between if you need to. Like that was a thing that I think we were using on one of the apps I was working on. We were using a scale of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we saw that 100 thing. And that was a thing that everyone just got. There was like no it didn't cause any friction. It made a ton of sense. So I'm thinking like, are there rules like that can apply to this layout stuff? I don't know.
Time will tell. Yeah, it's interesting. I do think the grid section in the Tailwind docs is good. I think there could even be some more docs on a good layout. Even those little, check mark, X mark things like, are you adding random sizes to width because you want your card to be 400 pixels? Instead,
I would be like, yeah.
Yep. Instead, do this. And, the EmberMap homepage is interesting. Like I removed so many classes and it just works out better. And like, you just have a max width and like the cards start like this and then they go a certain point and then you just start seeing more and more of them as the screen gets bigger in the kind of bookshelf treatment, and it works great, and it's just like way simpler than we made it.
Nice. Nice.
So yeah, it's been interesting. Anyways, yeah, it's been fun, and I want to update the font. I want to make it probably Inter UI, which is like a good open source font. We have like Avenir, but we never actually loaded it, so not all computers see the right font. So now we know more about all that stuff too. And so it's been fun. Been working on the homepage for Mirage. That'll be good because more people are starting to ask about it and use it and stuff, and the homepage is still like this random kind of landing page. So that's been fun.
Yeah.
We were moving pretty fast on that before the break.
Yeah, it's funny. We want to do like a video on the homepage, and that's like, I see that as like a big, not like blocker, but just a lot of work. It's like you can fly through the page with like React components and Tailwind, but like there's no version of that for a video that we want to make. So
I have a pretty good idea for that. It's more just making something that works for mobile, and we could start with screenshots too, but I really wanted to show off the workflow. It's hard because you want to communicate the workflow because that's one of the most important parts of Mirage.
Yep.
Man, I was working on it though, and I was refactoring some of the like the subscribe page in EmberMap, and so I wanted to switch back and forth between different users because that's like that and the settings page are basically two of the only parts of the site that are like different for auth users and admins and stuff. And so it's great to just open up Scenarios default and just do. I mean, it's so great. And like you had worked on the cache page with the fastbit responses, and like we didn't have any dummy data, so I just went and I was like, oh, I wonder if Ryan. I know Ryan wrote a test for this, so like Command P, cache test, boom, it's there. Open it up, look at all the names of the tests. And then the last one is like, I can view a cache and its responses. Looked at that. It was like server create cache URL, server create cache response, and then create a cache URL with the responses as array. So I just copy those 3 lines of server creates, go to our like scenarios default file where you're creating like an admin and just add it right there. And now I can just see it in development. It was awesome.
Oh, I see. So you took the tests,
The setup data that you had done for the test.
and then use that to create a dev environment.
Exactly. Because we have a pretty good dev environment. Like if you just git clone EmberMap and yarn install and then Ember serve, this is what a lot of people, I've been talking to a few people, and they don't understand how it enables this kind of workflow where it's like completely offline, completely local. It doesn't matter. Like new devs can start up on your project without needing to configure anything. That's like one of the huge selling points in Mirage.
Your dev environment is the same as my dev environment.
Exactly.
Which is huge.
Exactly. Exactly. Like our databases don't get out of sync. I was actually working with my brother, and he started using Mirage except for the login. And that was like, it's such a painful thing. And I was just trying to run his app on my machine, and like we had to do this whole login thing, right? So getting that mocked out in Mirage 2 is like a really good step. So we have all that stuff mocked out. There's one thing we don't have, which is a Stripe.js thing. So if you try to load this, you actually can't load the subscribe page on like an airplane.
Yeah.
Do you know how to mock? What do you do with that? Service level kind of thing?
I made a PR to the Ember Stripe add-on.
Oh yeah.
To allow you to not to control how Stripe.js is loaded.
Got you. So in testing.
So yeah, and just so like we only load Stripe.js on like our checkout page. So if it's like blocking render on the home page, that's a problem. So that's why I did that PR.
Got you.
And the way that works is it's a thing I got from like Matt and Corey that they did this like proof of concept like Glimmer store. Do you remember that?
I don't.
I think around when Glimmer came out, they did like a proof of concept, just like checkout Glimmer app. And
oh yeah.
And one of the things they did
stickers? Do they like sell stickers on it or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I think so.
I think I bought one. It had like Apple Pay and stuff.
Nice. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So they load Stripe lazily.
Okay.
And when I saw that, it was like, that's what the Ember Stripe add-on needs.
Should do.
So the way that works is that gives you an API that returns a promise, and the promise fulfills when Stripe is loaded, and it will reject if Stripe doesn't load.
Gotcha.
And so there should be like, for this case, with you developing on an airplane, the promise rejecting should not prevent the route from rendering.
Right.
So they're in dev, we can say it's okay for Stripe.js not to load. And then if you try to get to like the part of the checkout where it's like your
needs to interact with Stripe.js.
Yeah. So it's like doing credit card validation or getting a token.
Yep.
At that point, the like we're introducing a new state of the app.
Right.
It's usable offline. Right. And so we need to like control for that. Like
so
some
that
box
that
pops
makes
up.
an API request to Stripe eventually, directly to Stripe.
I think we load Stripe.js when you visit the checkout page, so that by the time you check out, you have Stripe loaded.
And then what are you loading Stripe for? To make an API call
To make an
on
API request. Yep.
And they're using their API.
Yep.
Like
you
Stripe.js.
You enter your credit card number.
charge.
That all goes to Stripe. Like that doesn't touch our servers at all. So for you to enter your credit card number.
And Stripe.js is not something that we bundle with our app.
No, that's
It's
something
loaded.
That's theirs. It's loaded by them. They
Gotcha.
update it. They do all that.
So it's not just the API requests and responses that are owned by them. It's also the actual code.
Yep.
But the APIs are stable. So you could mock those out.
Yep. Yeah.
And you can mock out the API requests that they make or whatever. Not even.
And I know Ruby has like a Stripe mock gem.
Yeah.
Where it's not maintained by Stripe. It's maintained by someone else. But the APIs are so stable that you can mock them.
Cool.
But it's more that the thing you're running into is even before that. You can't load Stripe.js.
Right. Well, there would be you'd have to move the boundary up a little bit.
Right.
That's something like a service that's like striped out of init and then test or dev without a network request.
Right.
It just
in our
resolves immediately or something like that.
Exactly. In the config file for Stripe, for the Stripe add-on, you can say like mock true, something
Oh,
like
okay.
that. That doesn't exist.
Oh.
But that's what you would want.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's tricky because the mocking this stuff is actually really hard because there's just a whole bunch of states to mock. So
that's why we need a Mirage.js / Stripe.
Yeah, but that's actually exactly
API
you
stuff.
want. You as an app developer don't want this. You want the like mocking library to handle this, because you want to say something like, here's a valid credit card number, but it's not allowed to make this type of purchase. Here's a invalid credit card number. Here's a valid credit card number, but it is expired. Mm-hmm. There's just all these different things you can mock out. So yeah, I wouldn't want us to have to maintain that.
Right. Totally. No, totally. Interesting. So anyways, what we were talking about was, that page didn't, but me going and getting that setup data from the test and then putting it in my dev scenario was just cool, because then I could see those tables that we wrote for like showing off the cache responses and stuff like that. And, it made me realize, like, it made me want an even easier way to do that, because that's just one state. Like, what if you want to see an empty cache response? What if you want to see this or that? And you already have those enumerated in your test suite. Like, you have so many. If you were to just do a cross section of all the tests we have in EmberMap's acceptance test suite, you could reproduce any environment you needed to.
Yeah, I could pick and choose all the server creates from every test to describe an environment.
Exactly. And there was another time when I was working on the plane where I wanted to see something and it was too complex to like get it in dev. So what I just did was like ran that test and did pause tests in that. But that's kind of like, it's just kind of a bummer. It's like you have to find the thing, you have to run the test suite. It was a new build. You have to filter it down. You have to do dev mode, and then you have to get there.
Wait, but I actually really like that approach, but I think it's painful because of how bad Ember's test runner unit
UI
and all that stuff like
that should be like the only way you ever run things locally, almost.
Yeah.
Where you just have the different scenarios and you start by choosing which one you want to run. And the development, the dev mode version of the test runner is so high fidelity that you literally can't tell the difference between that and running dev.
Pause test, full screen.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's...
By the way, there's a UI thing now in QUnit that says dev mode. You just click on it and it does full screen and pause test and everything. So it's pretty cool. So we used to write that ourselves. We don't have to write that anymore. It's pretty awesome.
Nice.
But I was just thinking how awesome it would be, like, if I just, even to start, instead of having to go and like edit tests and like drop a pause test and like import something maybe, or run Ember whatever. All I want is like this.
Dude, this is why it's so bad, because you have to import freaking pause tests.
You actually don't. You can do a wait this that pause test, which is what I do.
That's right.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, it's still like you're finding the thing you just want. It's a UI problem. So what I really want is like, dude, like a nested drop down where I just do that and I autocomplete, and it's like, admin test, homepage test, podcast test. It's like, boom, admin, cache, and then it has all of the tests right there. And it's just like, if there are no responses, I can see this. If I'm not an admin, I can see this. If there's a cache response with these URLs, I can see this. I just click on it, and then it just restarts the app with the Mirage database seeded with that scenario, and then I just am going. I'm off to the races.
So you're in dev mode.
Yes.
But you're using a database that it's like basically...
It just runs the test until the first visit.
Yeah.
And then I just get to use the app.
Yeah.
It would be awesome. But just in general, like a scenario chooser that is like a UI thing that makes it very easy. Imagine someone showing off a new feature of like Instagram or Facebook, like an app that's like completely dynamic. It's completely generated from runtime data requests. So something like that, Mirage is perfect. You can say, oh, here's a post with 10 likes. Here's a post with no likes. Here's a post with video. Boom. And you just like click on it and it's just reloading on those different states. Would be awesome. A UI for choosing scenarios would be amazing.
I like this. Do you think that like when I'm writing my tests and I'm setting up the world with server creates, I'm only doing enough to get the test running?
Right. I was thinking about this.
I'm not thinking
about the rest of the app.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So like you could run the app in that state, but it might be an invalid state.
Well, it shouldn't be. Not for the thing you're testing.
Not for the thing I'm testing, but for like the application as a whole.
Yes.
Because when you're in dev mode,
you don't have any videos and stuff if you're just doing cache responses or something like that.
Yeah. When you're in dev mode, we're talking about like, if I'm writing a test, it's like a narrow view into the app.
Right.
Like we can look at the test and we can say what components are going to be rendered.
Totally.
But in dev mode, we can't. It's like everything.
I know, but it's not, right? Because you're working with a dynamic app. So you try to make a dev scenario that is good enough to give you a lot of the things that you'll encounter in a real world situation, but like, is this video coming soon or is it published? Like, you want to be able to see both of those. So think about it. Most of the time in dev mode, you're working on like one feature, right? You're building a feature, which is like the same thing you're writing tests for. So yeah, a lot of times it would be good enough. If you just wanted Ember serve and like click around the app, that's fine. But like even then, like the dev seeds aren't actually that, you know, it's not like
that's a great point. I'm not doing this to demo the app. I'm doing this to develop a feature.
Exactly.
It's very narrow and focused.
Or debug something.
Yep.
But you could imagine ways also to compose or like combine these different scenarios in a way that's going to yield a production like scenario from these different things. But like if I just want the data that is needed for that cache test, I just want to point to the cache test because it's already there. It's being tested against, so I know that data seed logic is correct.
Man, I can't help but think though, it's like I don't want you bringing this stuff over to
Not
dev
copy
mode.
pasting it, but
No, but I think the answer.
But if you
is
pause test,
I think that's the answer. The answer is pause test.
No, but
it's
that's
it's so bad.
Well,
today.
okay, I think we're talking about the same thing. It's the what is the UI answer to make it easier to get the app into a pause test state. My tailbone still hurts. I went sledding in Minnesota. Dude, I was flying. I put my nephew right in my lap and you just ride this thing down. Freaking 6'5", 32-year-old man. You know, your body doesn't heal the same way as when you're younger. And you're going down and you're trying to like using your hands and like putting it in the snow to turn yourself. We got so good, dude. I nailed this jump. And then you just go up and boom, you land right on your tailbone. And then little Calvin looks at me. He's like, that was great. He's like, you know, he landed my soft lap. I'm like, oh, man, yeah, that was great. It's awful. So now when I sit too much in one position, my tailbone starts hurting.
Getting old, man.
Getting old. No, that's basically what I'm saying is like how to make it easier to get the pause test.
Okay, that's
state.
fair.
Getting to the pause test state.
I'm too focused on which environment are we running in. Are we running in dev or test? You're saying it doesn't matter. It's how do we get that data? How do we get that data on a screen that you can click around in for that feature?
Dude, you know what you just made me think of too? I was just thinking like, why should you even have a dev mode? Like why not always test mode? Dude, what are the kinds of things you do in dev that you don't do in tests? And should those things have test coverage? And the first thing I thought about was like, if I'm doing design work, I'm just going to run Ember serve and see everything. But like now I'm like, shouldn't you have like a Percy test to cover that? Like you want the design and like the layout and everything is like super important. So you actually want to test for that because if, you know, someone comes in and changes the font size, like I want to know about that.
Yeah.
And so you actually want a test that has the right kind of data to simulate a good high fidelity environment so that you can actually test your designs and do like a Percy snapshot. So if you had all that too, you would always just be able to choose from your test when it comes to developing something and you wouldn't even need dev mode.
Yeah. I mean, sure, you're like preaching to the choir here. The app that I worked on for like 9 months this year was I would TDD everything. The times when I wouldn't TDD, it's funny. I didn't think about design when you said that. It was when there's just some gnarly bug with how like data is loaded. And it's like, go to route A, go to route B, go to route C, now go back to route A. And there's like this weird thing that took place. And so it's those sort of things that like, I actually might write a test for it. But when I'm actually debugging it, I just fire up dev mode. When I'm like exploring it for the first time, I fire up dev mode. Man, the TDD stuff is so powerful. Good. It's just the tooling.
The UI stuff.
Freaking awful.
Yeah. Cypress has some good stuff.
I
we
feel
need to work more with that. They have this idea of where you like leave the last part hanging and then you get to use the test in that state. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like an automatic pause test at the end of
the last step.
Exactly. So you can progressively write your test.
Exactly.
Cypress also has some nice stuff like there's like a UI for like copying test selectors. Right. So it's like they've bought into test selectors.
Right.
And test selectors in Ember are amazing.
Totally.
But like the UI doesn't know about them.
Right.
I feel like Cypress would be like kind of Ember
the logical
acceptance.
conclusion.
Of Ember acceptance
evolution
testing.
of Ember acceptance testing. Yep. Pretty interesting, dude. There's some weird stuff in Cypress though, for sure. There's some weird stuff.
Yeah. I mean, for one, it's like they haven't bought into async await yet.
Right.
But
I just want to go back and tell them, look at what happened to Ember.
Yeah.
You're literally going to go through this just 3 years later. Just go ahead and bite the bullet, man. It's going to be so much better.
But dude, I'll tell you, like that really bothered me when I got started. because I think that was just something that was like really easy for me to focus on.
Yeah.
And I didn't know enough about Cypress.
Yeah.
And now when I use it, like I just
You don't care.
I don't care about
Yeah.
that. So the
I know,
benefits,
but like the debugger and stuff, it's just so nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
they
not,
should-
it's not perfect.
It probably didn't exist when they started Cypress.
Yeah.
It'll probably change eventually.
Even, yeah.
It's just this idea of like trying to hide asynchrony from you. That's what it's coming from. And it's like, no, you don't want to do that. Again, it's back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode. Like, give me lower level things and teach me how to use it right.
The reason I'm getting defensive around this is because I don't want to dismiss Cypress because it doesn't have this feature,
Yeah.
because everything else it brings is amazing.
They're aligned 100%. It's a detail. No,
Yeah.
no question. They're in the circle.
Yeah.
Greg, you're in the circle. They haven't left it yet. But, so yeah, it's great. We're going to be doing more Cypress, Mirage, React View stuff soon. Excited to see that. They have a really cool way they handle network requests, and we're hoping to find a way to hook Mirage into that.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. But yeah, that's all coming up. I guess the last thing to chat about really quick before we wrap up is we're talking about kind of coming up with a new name for the podcast. Based on some feedback we've gotten and based on the fact that our work is kind of broadening out a little bit and we're focusing on Mirage, which is really useful for kind of all front-end developers. That's just something that we're starting to roll around. And, we were talking about names, and we had this idea of Frontend First because, that goes back to one of our core beliefs when it comes to not only UI design, but even like what low-level code things. We always try to start with, how the thing is going to be used. And with our experience in open source, I think the first time I heard this was from Tom Dale. He said, README-driven development. It's a great idea. You did that with a feature from Fast Boot Testing, literally wrote the whole thing. And like we went back and forth on it before you even started coding anything.
Yep.
So that's like a great thing. And it's just a good reminder that the work we do, all the value of the coding and the architecture and the tools we use and the patterns and the libraries is all derived from the end user value. And so that's the logical place to start your focus.
It really changes. I'm thinking of that fast boot testing thing, and it really changes how like what you actually care about when it becomes time to when it comes time to code.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think even like Storefront has this where it's like really easy to get caught up in like the implementation of our cache, but at the end of the day, like that doesn't,
it's the detail.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, like our tests, because it's not public API, we don't even have a lot of test coverage there. We would know if we broke something.
Yep.
Because we have the higher level tests.
Totally.
But yeah, I think that's really good. Like the outside in approach.
Yep, exactly. When you first got me into testing and the outside in stuff really resonated with me. Again, you'll see that with Mirage. There's like few tests covering the details of so many of those things, but I have tons of tests covering all the public API, and I like that. And I know I'm confident in the test suite and everything. Even we had that long conversation when we built the bookshelves on EmberMap's homepage. That was an example of the API side where how you want to expose the server resources is really driven by the particular use case for the UI.
Yep.
And it's also why we've been really drawn to GraphQL lately, because that's really, from the beginning, they've said, we're unapologetic about serving the needs of the client. And again, that's really aligned. So when we were talking about this, we actually found this website called like frontendfirstdevelopment.com. And it's really good.
Yeah.
It's really good. So I'll link to it in the show notes because it's really good. And it has a lot of these values listed out. And, just trying to think of something a little more timeless too, that is not about any particular technology, because we like to try to talk about the meta stuff, the one level up kind of things. And I think this is a fundamental principle that's not going to change regardless of if I never did JavaScript development again and I became, even
if you're working on a backend app, you think of like who are the consumers of this.
Exactly.
And start there.
Exactly. I had this good Twitter conversation with Taylor Otwell, the creator of Laravel, and he was saying, I don't have the UI chops to do that first. I wish I could. When I first started his latest project, which was Vapor, I think, or was it something else? Might have been something else. But he was basically saying that he started with a terminal UI, like a command line interface. it's the same principle, right? It's still
If
front end first.
If that's how the users are going to be using it, yeah.
Exactly. That is the front end of your application. And so you're already thinking in the right mentality there. So I thought that was a cool little tidbit. It's not always about UI or design. It's just about the front end or the UI or the user experience. The front end of the thing you're building is important. And if you're just writing a library, again, the README is the front end, right? The classes and the public interface are the first things you should be thinking about, and the other work should derive from that, you know. And it's not always, there's some nuance there, which is why it's fun to talk about. Like, if you know your backend's using GraphQL or JSON API, obviously it's going to inform how your front end code is going to look. But fundamentally, the thing is being driven from the needs of the client. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So we'll see about that, and we're still kind of just talking about it, but that's something to keep an eye out for. And yeah, I guess that's it. Excited about 2020.
Yeah, hell yeah.
My theme last year was let your yeses be yes and your no's be no's. You know, that was kind of like, I feel like that was a good lesson that I focused on and learned and continue to work on. But just the idea of feeling really bad about not following through with things, or yeah, like that's something I don't want to be known for. That's not something that I want to do, and I don't appreciate that when like other people don't do that. So I just really felt that was something important that I wanted to work on. And
how'd you do?
I think I did pretty good. I think one of the things that it does is it forces you to say yes to less, because you don't want to say yes unless you're going to follow through, which I think is good. But that is something that I need to work on even more. So the theme of this year, I think, is if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So this idea of working on only the things that are really exciting and really worth it to you. And, you know, there's this book right here actually on our table, The Power of a Positive No. And the idea there is every time you say no to something, there's a deeper yes behind it, which helps you understand why you're saying no. And so instead of focusing on like disappointing somebody, you're saying, I'm saying no to this so that I can say yes to my fitness in the future or my business in the future.
Yeah, that's really good. Like to have that core value or something that's deeper down.
Right.
That makes it easy to say no to things.
Right. So you don't get hung up on that.
Yeah.
In the moment. And there's even this, you know, someone asks you, oh, I'm going to be in town for a month and you want to get coffee. And it's someone who's like, you know, or a meeting or a potential job or something, a little side project. And you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I'll do this. Like so easy to just throw something on the calendar a month from now. But a good way around that is to ask yourself, if I could do this today, would I? And a lot of times it's, well, I have these other things I would love to, but like I have these other things that I definitely want to do more. And you're probably going to feel like that in a month. So that's a good time to be able to work on saying no, you know. And if it's not a hell yes, where sometimes like, oh, hell yes, I want to see this person, I would drop everything I'm doing to go talk or to have this opportunity to work on this thing. So I think that's going to be my theme for 2020, a lesson I'm going to work on.
Nice.
Yeah. Focus, you know, maybe limit Twitter to like once a week, once every 2 weeks. Well, you don't think I can do it?
Start with like, you know, once a day. When you can do once a day, then
I can do that pretty easily. It's more just like if I know it's available, it's easy to just pop over to it.
Yeah.
But I just want to focus on the most important things and say no to everything else.
You know what's funny about the Twitter stuff? I'm just going to derail
this. Go for it.
I find myself on Twitter when I'm in a spot like I'm waiting for something to build, or like I feel like it's not.
Yeah, that's what you say, and then you realize the tests were done 10 minutes ago.
Well, yeah, that is definitely true. You're waiting for something to build. You go on Twitter, the thing finishes, and you're still on Twitter.
Dude, sometimes you go on Twitter to look up something legitimately important that you needed to reference, and then you just you're just looking at other crap that doesn't matter. That's a problem. It's like it's a mixed bag, you know. It can just be full of noise and stuff. But anyways, I get so much value out of Twitter. I love it. But it's more about just, okay, what are the things that are our priorities this week, this month, and let's just come in and just do them and like just laser focus and not have our hands spread too thin, you know, and just be able to knock things out. So
yeah,
I think that's what it's going to be, at least right now, at least at this point in 2020. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. So I think it's a good lesson.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if maybe you could have heard my stomach growling this whole episode, but it just did it again. So that means I need to go eat something. 2:30. Had a CrossFit workout this morning. Time to eat.
Nice.
All right, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Bye.